There is a stretch of water between Sumatra and Malaysia where the shipping lanes never really go quiet. Freighters, tankers, fishing boats. Day and night, someone is always crossing it. But on one ordinary afternoon in the summer of 1947, a radio operator hundreds of miles away picked up a message from a ship that, officially, never existed. The message read,
"All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole crew dead. I die."
When the crew that answered that signal finally climbed aboard, they didn't find blood. They didn't find a struggle. They found every single man on the ship lying on his back, arms stretched upward, mouth open, eyes fixed on the sky, and the ship's dog, dead in exactly the same position, teeth bared at nothing, no wounds, no fight, no explanation. An entire crew, gone in what looks like seconds, on a ship that vanished from the ocean less than an hour later, and from every official shipping record before that. This is the story of the Ourang Medan, the ghost ship that may have never had a name to begin with. By most tellings, it was June of 1947. Southeast Asia was still stitching itself back together after Japanese occupation, and shipping lanes through the Strait of Malacca were busier than they'd been in a decade. Cargo vessels from a dozen flags moved through those waters, most of them unremarkable, most of them forgotten, the moment they reached port. The Ourang Medan was supposedly one of those cargo ships, a freighter, flying under uncertain registry, moving cargo nobody could later confirm. The first ships to hear from her were American, the Silver Star, and, in some versions of the account, a second vessel called the City of Baltimore. Their radio operators picked up the same transmission almost simultaneously. A distress call with no preamble. No ship's name given, at first. No coordinates that made immediate sense. Just a string of Morse code coming in fast, chaotic, and then that line. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole crew dead. The Silver Star's operator tried to raise a response. Nothing coherent came back, just fragments before the final transmission. "I die." And then the channel went silent. The Silver Star changed course. Whatever had happened, it had happened to a ship close enough to reach, and whoever sent that message had done it with their last working breath. The crew prepared for the worst kind of rescue. Not one where you save someone, but one where you document what killed them. When the Ourang Medan came into view, she was drifting. No engine noise, no crew on deck, no response to repeated hails. She looked, from a distance, like any other freighter, idling between routes, which made what the boarding party found even harder to process. They climbed aboard to silence. The first bodies were on the bridge. Officers, exactly where the distress call said they'd be. Then more, scattered through the corridors and the chart room below. Every account of the story agrees on the same details, almost word for word. The men were on their backs. Their arms were raised, some bent as if shielding their faces from something above them. Their mouths were open. Their eyes were open too, fixed upward. Expressions frozen somewhere between shock and pure terror. There was no blood anywhere on the ship. No signs of a struggle, no forced doors, no weapons drawn. Whatever had killed this crew hadn't given them time to fight back. Or maybe it had, and fighting hadn't mattered. Even the ship's dog was dead in the same position as the men, on its back, jaw open, as if it had died mid-snarl at whatever the crew had seen. The boarding party pressed on to the radio room, expecting to find the operator who'd sent that final transmission. They found him at his station. Some tellings say his hand was still resting on the telegraph key, fingers curled as though he'd died the instant he finished typing "I die," as if the message had cost him the last seconds he had. More than one version of the story mentions something else. The air below deck was cold, not just shaded from the sun cold, noticeably, uncomfortably cold, in a ship sitting in equatorial waters. Nobody in the boarding party could explain why. They didn't get long to look for an explanation. As the Silver Star's crew prepared to rig a tow line and bring the Ourang Medan into port, smoke started rising from her cargo hold. It spread fast, faster than anyone expected from a fire with no clear source. Whatever was down there, it caught and grew before anyone could get below to fight it. The boarding party cut their losses and abandoned ship, rowing back to the Silver Star as flames worked through the hull. Minutes later, depending on the account, it could have been less. The Ourang Medan exploded. The blast was violent enough to break her apart at the waterline. She went down fast, taking her cargo, her crew, and whatever caused their deaths, straight to the bottom of the strait. No wreckage was ever recovered. No bodies were brought to shore. Every physical trace of the ship, and every answer that trace might have held, disappeared with her. Which means everything we think we know about what happened aboard the Ourang Medan comes from second-hand reports, written long after the fact by people describing a ship that no longer exists. And that, as it turns out, may never have existed in the way the story claims. If you take the story at face value, the obvious question is, what kills an entire crew instantly, leaves no wounds, and produces that specific look of terror on every face? The most repeated theory involves the ship's cargo. Several versions of the story claim the Ourang Medan was secretly carrying wartime chemical agents, nerve gas, or potassium cyanide, smuggled out of Japan in the chaotic aftermath of its surrender. One darker variant even ties the cargo to Unit 731, the Japanese military's biological and chemical weapons program, suggesting the ship was moving evidence or leftover stock before it could be traced. Under this theory, a leak in the hold would have released toxic fumes through the ship's ventilation, killing the crew in place, wherever they happened to be standing. Which would explain why the bodies were found scattered through so many different rooms, rather than gathered in one. The second most common theory points to something far more mundane: carbon monoxide poisoning from a boiler malfunction or engine failure. It's a poison sailors of that era knew well, and it can kill quickly in an enclosed space. But it has a problem that the chemical cargo theory doesn't. Carbon monoxide poisoning is typically gradual. Victims grow drowsy, disoriented, and lose consciousness. They don't usually die instantly, mid-motion, with their arms raised and mouths open in apparent horror. If this crew died the way witnesses described, carbon monoxide alone simply doesn't explain it. A third theory swaps chemistry for physics: decompression sickness caused by a sudden pressure change in the cargo hold, say, from an improperly stored load of compressed gas. It could account for a fast, agonizing death. Yet, it doesn't fully explain the specific uniform posture of the bodies, or why a ship's dog on the open deck died in the exact same position as men below in an enclosed hold. None of these theories has ever been tested against a body, a log, or a wreck, because none of those things have ever surfaced. Every explanation for the Ourang Medan is built entirely on descriptions of a scene nobody photographed and a ship nobody has ever found. Here's where the story gets stranger than the deaths themselves. The SS Ourang Medan does not appear in Lloyd's Register of Ships, the closest thing the maritime world has to a master record of every vessel built, registered, and insured. No shipyard has ever come forward with records of building her. No port has any log of her docking, loading cargo, or clearing customs. The Silver Star's own ship's log, the one document that should have recorded receiving a distress call and boarding a doomed vessel, contains no mention of the incident at all. For a ship that supposedly sailed under a real flag, carried a real crew, and died in a documented location on a specific date, there is no paperwork, not a fragment. And the story itself doesn't even agree on when it happened. Some versions place it in 1940, south of the Solomon Islands, thousands of miles from the Strait of Malacca. Other tellings move it to February 1948, near Malacca, with a different crew, a different rescuing ship, and, in that version, a doctor who actually examines the bodies and rules the death's natural causes, finding no evidence of poison or asphyxiation at all. The most popular version settles on June 1947, but even that date shifts, depending on which retelling you read. Historians and maritime researchers who've tried to trace the story back to its origin generally land on the same conclusion. The earliest known publication of the tale appears to be a newspaper account from that era, credited to second-hand sources with no verifiable names attached. The kind of story that reads like eyewitness testimony, but can't actually be traced to an eyewitness. From there, the story spread through the exact channels that made 20th century maritime folklore travel fastest: pulp magazines, Forteana collections, and later paranormal anthologies, each retelling adding detail, sharpening the imagery, and rarely citing anything you could go back and check. So is the Ourang Medan a true story with the paperwork lost to time, or an urban legend that calcified into history through decades of repetition? The case for a hoax is strong. No registry entry, no wreck, no verified crew list, ever. No consistent date, route, or rescuing ship across different tellings. And a detail that should exist and doesn't. If the Silver Star really diverted course, boarded a ship full of corpses, and watched it explode, that is exactly the kind of event that gets written into a ship's official log. Mandatory reporting, insurance claims, maritime authorities notified. None of that paperwork has ever surfaced from any of the ships supposedly involved. The case for maybe something happened is thinner, but it's not nothing. Distress signal ghost ship stories were common enough in that era that some of them turn out to have a kernel of a real, much less dramatic event underneath. A boat that genuinely lost its crew to fire, engine failure, or disease, retold and embellished until it barely resembles the original incident. It's possible some real, forgotten maritime tragedy got fused with pulp fiction flourishes until the two became indistinguishable. What nobody can do, not historians, not the Dutch or American navies, not maritime insurers, is point to a single verified document that proves the Ourang Medan was ever a real ship. Which means every theory about what killed her crew is technically a theory about a ship that has never been confirmed to exist. Maybe that's the most unsettling part of this story. Not the frozen faces, or the cold air below deck, or the fire that erased the evidence. It's that we can't even agree on whether there's anything to solve. If the Ourang Medan was real, her crew died some kind of horrible death that 1940s science couldn't explain, and modern science can't test. Because the ship and everyone aboard her went to the bottom of the strait before an answer was possible. And if she wasn't real, if this is a story stitched together from secondhand rumor and pulp magazine imagination, then somewhere out there is whoever wrote it first. Someone sat down, decades ago, and invented a ship, a crew, a distress signal, and a death so specific and so strange that it's still being told as fact more than 70 years later. Either way, the Ourang Medan got exactly what her story promised from the very first transmission. Not an answer, just silence.